The command station hung in space like a steel flower, its metal petals stretched toward distant stars. Inside the main council chamber, tension filled the air so thick it could almost be touched. Daniel Grant sat in the back row, watching two of the most powerful beings in the galaxy prepare to destroy each other. Ambassador Talon Vare stood on one side of the round table. His body was made of living crystal that shifted colors with his emotions. Right now those crystals burned angry red, casting harsh light across the polished floor. His voice rang out like breaking glass. The Valorians were a proud warrior race, and their ambassador spoke with the authority of 10,000 years of civilization. Across from him stood Hive Commander Zarek. His insect body was covered in dark armor plates, each one bearing scars from old battles. His forearms gestured sharply as he spoke, and his mandibles clicked with anger. The Kresh Collective had survived and thrived in the harshest corners of space. They did not back down from anyone. Daniel had been attending these meetings for 6 weeks now. He was 28 years old, fresh from Earth's diplomatic academy and completely out of his depth. Or at least that was what everyone thought. The truth was more complicated. Daniel had been learning, watching, taking notes that nobody bothered to read. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Coalition, barely 50 years since first contact. Most species viewed them as curious children, harmless and a bit simple. That suited Daniel just fine. Being underestimated meant people spoke freely around him. They forgot he was there. They revealed things they might have hidden from more important observers. And Daniel had a very good memory. The argument between the Valorians and the Kresh had been building for 3 years. It started with mining rights in the outer spiral territories, a region rich with rare minerals that both species claimed. Diplomatic talks had failed. Trade agreements fell apart. Small incidents had escalated into serious confrontations. Now fleet commanders on both sides were receiving orders to prepare for war. The other species in the coalition had tried to mediate. The wise elders from Proxima had offered their counsel. The telepathic mindweavers had attempted to smooth over emotional conflicts. The ancient archives had provided historical examples of peaceful resolution. Nothing worked. The Valorians and Kresh were determined to settle this with violence. High Counselor Maeve Kerrigan sat beside Daniel. She was 60 years old with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been working in galactic diplomacy for 30 years, longer than most humans had even known aliens existed. She leaned close to Daniel and whispered, her voice barely audible above the shouting. "Stay quiet. Let them work this out themselves. We're too new here to get involved in something this big." Daniel nodded, but his mind was racing. He had spent the last 2 weeks going through every document related to this conflict. Trade records, mining reports, incident logs, communication transcripts. He had created his own timeline of events, printed it out and studied it until he could recite every detail from memory. And he had noticed something strange. The incidents that had inflamed this crisis were too perfect. Too well-timed. 3 years ago, a Valorian mining crew had disappeared right before a major diplomatic summit. Their ship was found empty, drifting near Kresh territory. 2 years ago, a Kresh breeding ground was damaged by equipment that investigation teams could not identify. 18 months ago, a series of communications between the two sides had been intercepted and published, making each species look aggressive and unreasonable. Each incident pushed the conflict forward. Each one happened at exactly the moment when peace talks might have succeeded. Daniel had studied enough human history to recognize a pattern. This was not random bad luck. Someone was manipulating both sides. Ambassador Vare slammed one crystalline hand on the table. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. "Enough talk. The Kresh have stolen from us, violated our territorial rights, and shown no respect for coalition law. We will defend what is ours." Commander Zarek's mandibles spread wide, a clear threat display in Kresh body language. "Your accusations are lies. It was Valorian equipment that destroyed our breeding grounds. Our young died because of your carelessness. The collective demands justice." The head mediator, a tall being from the neutral Xanthera species, raised all 6 of her arms. "Please, both sides have valid concerns. Perhaps if we examine the evidence once more, we might find common ground." "There is no common ground," Vare said. His color had shifted to deep crimson, the shade of Valorian determination. "We have exhausted diplomatic options. The war declaration has been prepared. We will sign it today." "As will we," Zarek agreed. The collective will not stand idle while our people are harmed. 2 aides stepped forward, carrying data tablets with the formal declarations. In minutes, the galaxy would be at war. 2 of the coalition's most powerful military forces would begin destroying each other. Trade routes would collapse. Neutral species would be forced to choose sides. The peace that had held for generations would shatter. Daniel felt his heart pounding. High Counselor Kerrigan had her head in her hands, knowing what was coming. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species looked on helplessly. Some had tears in their eyes. Others showed anger or resignation. No one seemed to have any solutions left. But Daniel had a solution. At least he thought he did. The evidence was circumstantial, incomplete, and would require more investigation. If he was wrong, he would make humanity look foolish. If he was right but could not prove it, the result would be the same. He would be gambling his career, his reputation, and possibly Earth's standing in the coalition. The aides placed the tablets on the table. Ambassador Vare reached for one. Commander Zarek reached for the other. Daniel made his decision. He stood up. The movement caught several eyes. High Counselor Kerrigan grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back down. He gently removed her hand and stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but in the sudden silence of the chamber everyone heard him clearly. "Wait, please, just wait one moment." Ambassador Vare turned to look at him. The ancient Valorian's face was unreadable, but his color shifted slightly toward orange, which Daniel had learned meant curiosity. "The human wishes to speak? This is highly irregular." "I know," Daniel said. He walked forward until he stood at the edge of the council table. Up close, both leaders were even more intimidating. Vare towered over him by 2 feet. Zarek's forearms could probably tear a human apart without effort. But Daniel had not come this far to back down now. "I have been studying the timeline of this conflict," Daniel continued, "and I believe both of you are being manipulated. I think someone else is responsible for the incidents that brought you to this point. Someone who wants you to go to war." The chamber erupted. Some species laughed. Others looked offended. A few seemed intrigued. Commander Zarek made a harsh clicking sound that Daniel's translator rendered as contemptuous dismissal. "You dare suggest we are fools?" Zarek demanded. "That we cannot see simple truth?" "No," Daniel said quickly. "I'm suggesting that someone very clever has been lying to both of you, making you see each other as enemies when you should be looking elsewhere." Ambassador Vare studied Daniel for a long moment. His crystalline fingers drummed on the table, creating a sound like wind chimes. Finally, he spoke. "You have evidence of this manipulation?" "I have patterns," Daniel admitted. "Circumstantial evidence. Things that do not add up. But I need time to investigate further to prove what I suspect." "We have no time," Zarek said flatly. "The declaration will be signed today." Daniel took a deep breath. "Give me 24 hours, one day. Let me investigate and present my findings. If I'm wrong, you can proceed with your war. But if I'm right, you'll be glad you waited." The silence stretched. Ambassador Vare looked at Commander Zarek. Zarek looked back. Daniel could almost see the calculation happening behind their eyes. Neither wanted to appear weak. Neither wanted to seem afraid. But both were old enough, wise enough to recognize sincerity when they heard it. "One day," Vare said finally, "but no more. If you waste our time, human, there will be consequences." "Agreed," Zarek added. 24 hours, then we sign, regardless of what you find." Daniel felt relief wash over him, followed immediately by terror. He had just promised to solve a 3-year-old crisis in one day. He had no idea if it was even possible, but he had bought time, and time was what he needed most. As the council chamber emptied, High Counselor Kerrigan pulled Daniel aside. Her expression was worried. "I hope you know what you're doing. If you fail, this could hurt humanity's reputation for generations." "I know," Daniel said. "But if I do nothing and they go to war, I'll never forgive myself." He walked quickly toward his quarters. He had 24 hours to save the galaxy from war. The countdown had begun. Daniel's quarters were small, barely large enough for a bed, desk, and storage locker. He did not care about the size right now. He needed space to work, and he needed it fast. Within 30 minutes of leaving the council chamber, his floor was covered with printed documents. Other species would have used holographic displays, advanced search algorithms, quantum computers to sort through the data. Daniel had a printer, colored markers, and balls of string. To anyone watching through the security cameras, he probably looked ridiculous, but this was how he worked best. Physical papers he could touch, move around and see all at once. He started with the timeline. Every incident between the Valorians and Kresh for the past 3 years went up on his wall. He used red marker for Valorian losses, blue for Kresh losses, and yellow for suspicious coincidences. By the time he finished, more yellow markers dotted the timeline than red or blue. The door chimed. Daniel looked up, blinking tired eyes. He had been working for 3 hours straight without break. Lieutenant Sophie Hayes stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and a sandwich. She was a security officer, stationed on the same level as the human diplomatic team. Daniel had spoken to her a few times in passing. "Heard you might need this," Sophie said, stepping over piles of paper to hand him a cup. She was 30 years old, with dark hair tied back in a practical bun. Her uniform was crisp despite the late hour. "The whole station is talking about what you did in the council chamber. Probably calling me an idiot," Daniel muttered, taking a grateful sip of coffee. "Some are," Sophie admitted with a slight smile. "Others think you're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Maybe both. What are you actually looking for?" Daniel gestured at his wall of papers. "Proof that someone has been engineering this whole conflict. Look at this. 3 years ago, the Valorian mining crew disappears. Their ship is found empty, but the black box data was corrupted. No one could figure out what happened. 2 weeks later, diplomatic talks collapse." Sophie moved closer, studying the timeline. "That could be coincidence." "Could be," Daniel agreed. "Now look at this. 18 months ago, someone hacks the communication channels and releases private messages between Valorian and Kresh diplomats. The messages make both sides look aggressive and dishonest. The leak happens the day before a major peace summit. The summit gets canceled. Still could be coincidence," Sophie said, but her voice was less certain now. "Here's the one that convinced me," Daniel said, pointing to a cluster of papers. 6 months ago, a Kresh breeding ground gets damaged. Investigation teams found equipment fragments at the scene. The fragments were identified as Valorian mining tools. But look at the metallurgy report. The tools were made from an alloy that Valorians stopped using 20 years ago. Someone planted old equipment to make it look like the Valorians were responsible. Sophie was quiet for a moment, reading through the reports Daniel indicated. "If you're right, someone has been very patient. Very careful. This kind of long-term manipulation takes resources and planning." "Exactly," Daniel said. "So I started asking myself, who benefits from a war between the Valorians and Kresh? Not them, obviously. They'll lose ships, people, resources. Not the coalition as a whole, since we'll be weaker and divided. So who wins?" He pulled out another stack of papers. These were financial records, shipping manifests, and corporate registrations. "Someone who wants to buy up mining rights cheap after the war makes them worthless. Someone who wants to control trade routes once the military powers are weakened. Someone who profits from chaos." Sophie sat down on the edge of Daniel's desk, careful not to disturb his organized chaos. "You're following the money." "It's what humans do best," Daniel said with a tired smile. "We've had thousands of years of practice watching people lie, cheat, and manipulate for profit. I figured those skills might be useful here." They worked together for the next several hours. Sophie had access to security databases that Daniel could not reach. She pulled up surveillance footage from the disputed territories. She found customs records that had not been included in the official reports. Daniel matched everything against his timeline, looking for patterns. Around hour 12, Sophie made a connection. "Look at this. There's a trading company called Stellar Ventures. They've been buying up options on mining rights in the disputed zones. If war breaks out, those rights become worthless. But if the company then buys the actual rights for almost nothing after the war ends, they'll own some of the richest mineral deposits in the galaxy." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Who owned Stellar Ventures? Sophie worked through layers of corporate ownership, her fingers flying across her data tablet. "It's buried under about 6 shell companies, but the ultimate owner is the Novan Syndicate." The Novans. Daniel sat back, processing this. The Novan species were not warriors. They were traders, merchants, and business people. They had a reputation for being shrewd negotiators, sometimes ruthlessly so. They controlled vast commercial networks across the coalition, and they were absolutely capable of this kind of long-term manipulation. "We need more," Daniel said. This shows motive, but we need to prove they actually did it. Can you trace any of the incidents back to Novan involvement? They dug deeper. Sophie found security footage from the station, where the Valorian mining crew had last been seen before disappearing. In the background of one frame, barely visible, was a ship with Novan registration codes. Daniel found financial transfers from a Novan account to a mercenary group known for taking questionable jobs. Hour 16 brought the biggest breakthrough. Daniel was reading through communication logs when he found something odd. The hacked messages that had been released to damage both sides had originated from a relay station in neutral space. Sophie pulled up the ownership records for that relay station. It was operated by a subsidiary of the Novan Syndicate. They used their own equipment to hack and leak the messages, Sophie said, shaking her head in disbelief. That's incredibly arrogant, or incredibly confident that no one would look, Daniel replied. Think about it. Who investigates traders and merchants? Everyone was focused on the military powers, on the Valorians and Kresh. The Novans stayed in the background manipulating events, and nobody suspected them because they're not warriors. Daniel stood and stretched, his back aching from hours of hunching over papers. His wall was now covered with connections, lines of string running from evidence to suspects to motives. It looked like something from a detective movie, but it was working. We have motive, opportunity, and evidence of capability, Daniel said, but we need something irrefutable, something that directly ties the Novan Syndicate to at least one of the major incidents. Sophie had been quiet for a few minutes, scrolling through data on her tablet. Suddenly she looked up, her eyes wide. Daniel, I think I found it. Remember that breeding ground that was damaged? The one with the fake Valorian equipment? Yes? I pulled the full sensor logs from nearby coalition monitoring stations. There was a ship in the area at the time of the attack. It had its transponder off, but the energy signature matches Novan civilian transports. And there's more. I cross-referenced the ship's trajectory with other incidents on your timeline. The same energy signature appears near 3 other major events. Daniel felt a surge of excitement mixed with exhaustion. This was it. This was the proof they needed. A Novan ship had been present at multiple incidents, always with its identification systems disabled, always at exactly the wrong time and place. He checked the time. 4 hours left before his deadline. 4 hours to compile everything into a presentation that would convince 2 warrior species to back down from war. 4 hours to save the galaxy. Help me organize this, Daniel said to Sophie. We need to make it clear and simple. No complicated technical details that might confuse the issue. Just the facts laid out in a way that anyone can follow. They worked frantically, creating visual aids and summary documents. Daniel focused on telling a story, not just presenting data. He needed to make Ambassador Vare and Commander Zarek feel the manipulation, understand how they had been played against each other. Sophie printed out the key evidence and helped Daniel arrange it in order. She also made backups of everything on secure data tablets just in case. As the hours ticked away, the chaos of Daniel's quarters transformed into an organized case against the Novan Syndicate. With 1 hour remaining, Daniel sat down and went through the entire presentation in his mind. He imagined the questions he might face, the objections that would be raised. He prepared his responses. This was not just about facts anymore. This was about persuasion, about making people see what they had missed. Sophie brought him fresh coffee and made him eat another sandwich. You need energy for this, she said firmly. No matter how good your evidence is, it won't help if you pass out in the middle of presenting it. Daniel managed a weak laugh. Thanks for staying with me through all this. I couldn't have done it alone. Someone had to make sure you didn't forget to breathe, Sophie replied. Besides, this is important. If you're right, you're about to change everything. The call came 30 minutes before the deadline. The council chamber was ready. Ambassador Vare and Commander Zarek were waiting. It was time. Daniel gathered his materials, took a deep breath. The council chamber was more crowded than Daniel had ever seen it. Word had spread throughout the station about the humans' bold claim. Representatives from every coalition species filled the seats and standing areas. Some had come to witness his triumph. More had come to watch him fail. Ambassador Vare sat in his usual place, his crystalline body still showing traces of red anger. Commander Zarek stood across from him, mandibles clicking in a rhythm that suggested impatience. Between them, the empty space at the center of the chamber waited for Daniel. Daniel walked to the center, carrying a small case of physical documents and a data tablet. Sophie had helped him set up holographic displays earlier, but Daniel had decided to keep his presentation simple. He wanted everyone to be able to follow his reasoning without getting lost in complicated technology. High Counselor Kerrigan gave him an encouraging nod from her seat. She still looked worried, but she had chosen to trust him. That meant something. Ambassador Vare, Commander Zarek, honored representatives, Daniel began. His voice was steady despite his exhaustion. 24 hours ago, I asked you to wait before signing a declaration of war. I promised to show you evidence that both your species were being manipulated. I am here to fulfill that promise. He activated the holographic display. A timeline appeared in the air, showing the major incidents of the past 3 years. Red markers indicated Valorian losses. Blue markers showed Kresh suffering. Yellow markers highlighted suspicious circumstances. I want to start by acknowledging something important, Daniel said. Both your peoples have suffered real losses. Valorian miners disappeared. Kresh breeding grounds were damaged. These are not imaginary grievances. Your anger is justified. But I ask you to consider a question. Who benefits from your anger? The chamber was quiet. Daniel could feel the attention of hundreds of beings focused on him. He continued, not the Valorians. You will lose warriors in a war, spend resources and gain mining rights that will be worth less after being fought over. Not the Kresh. You will lose ships and face threats to your colonies while your military is deployed elsewhere. Not the Coalition, which will be weakened by internal conflict. So who wins? He brought up the financial data. Simple charts showed the flow of money and resources. Someone who has been quietly buying options on mining rights in the disputed territories. Someone who stands to gain enormous wealth and power if war makes those rights worthless, allowing them to be bought for almost nothing. Ambassador Vare leaned forward. His color had shifted from red toward orange. You are suggesting someone orchestrated this entire conflict for profit? I am, Daniel said. And I can prove it. Let me walk you through the evidence. He started with the disappearance of the Valorian mining crew 3 years ago. He showed security footage from the last station they had visited before vanishing. In the background of the footage, barely visible but present, was a ship with Novan registration codes. The Novan Syndicate has been involved in this from the beginning, Daniel explained. This ship appears again and again near sites of major incidents, always with its transponder disabled, but the energy signature is distinctive. Coalition sensors logged it, but nobody connected the data because it seemed irrelevant at the time. He moved to the next incident, the hacked communications that had been released to embarrass both sides. These messages originated from a relay station in neutral space. That relay station is operated by a Novan subsidiary. They use their own equipment to intercept, alter, and release communications designed to make you hate each other. Commander Zarek made a sharp clicking sound. You accuse the Novans? They are traitors, not warriors. Why would they risk such actions? Because they are traitors, Daniel answered. They think in terms of profit and loss, not honor and combat. They saw an opportunity to reshape the entire coalition power structure. With the 2 strongest military species at war, the Novans would control the economic aftermath. They would dictate trade terms, control resources, and become the real power in the galaxy. He brought up the evidence about the damaged Kresh breeding ground. The equipment found at the scene was identified as Valorian, but metallurgy reports show it was made from an alloy that Valorians stopped using 20 years ago. Someone planted old equipment to frame you. Ambassador Vare. They wanted the Kresh to blame you for an attack you did not commit. Vare's color had shifted fully to orange now, the Valorian shade for troubled consideration. Zarek's mandibles had stopped their impatient clicking. Both leaders were listening intently. From the audience, a voice called out, "These are serious accusations, human. Do you have direct proof?" The speaker was a Novan representative, Trade Minister Kalos Ven. His smooth features showed concern, but his eyes were calculating. Daniel had been expecting this. He turned to face Kalos directly. "I do, Minister. Would you like to see it?" He activated another display. This one showed a recorded conversation. The voices belonged to Kalos Ven and a mercenary captain. They were discussing payment for an operation. The operation was described in detail. It matched exactly with the attack on the Kresh breeding ground. The chamber erupted in chaos. Kalos's face went pale. He stood abruptly, looking toward the exits. But security officers were already moving to block his path. Sophie had coordinated with station security before the presentation. They had been waiting for this moment. Ambassador Vare rose to his full height, his crystal body blazing with light. "You dared to manipulate my people, to use our honor against us?" His voice resonated through the chamber like thunder. Commander Zarek's forearms spread wide in a Kresh threat display. "You attacked our young, our future. For money?" His clicking had become harsh, aggressive. Kelos tried to speak to defend himself, but the evidence was overwhelming. Other Novan representatives in the chamber began backing away from him, distancing themselves from his actions. The syndicate might have been involved, but none of them wanted to be associated with this level of manipulation. Daniel raised his hand, calling for quiet. The gesture was presumptuous from someone so young and low-ranking, but somehow it worked. The chamber settled. "I want to say something about how this happened," Daniel began. The Novan succeeded because they understood how to exploit each species' nature. They knew Valorians are proud warriors who respond to challenges with force. They knew the Kresh value honor and collective survival above individual concerns. They used these strengths against you, turning virtues into vulnerabilities. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Humanity has made this same mistake countless times in our history. We have let our emotions override our judgment. We have rushed into conflicts without asking the right questions. We have believed lies because they confirmed what we already felt. I recognize this pattern because my species has painful experience with it." Ambassador Vare studied Daniel for a long moment. Then slowly the ancient Valorian approached. He placed one crystalline hand on Daniel's shoulder. The gesture was profound in Valorian culture, a sign of deep respect and recognition. "You have given us a great gift, young human," Vare said. His voice was gentle now, the rage replaced by gratitude. "You saved us from a terrible mistake." Commander Zarek moved forward as well. His chitinous claw rested on Daniel's other shoulder. "The Kresh Collective owes you a debt. You saw clearly when we were blinded by anger. This is wisdom we will remember." Standing between the two great leaders, Daniel felt the weight of what had just happened. He had stopped a war. He had exposed a conspiracy. But more than that, he had helped two proud peoples see past their differences to a common truth. The head mediator called for order. "In light of this evidence, I propose that the war declarations be permanently withdrawn. Furthermore, I suggest an immediate coalition investigation into the full extent of Novan Syndicate activities." The vote was unanimous. Security forces took Kelos into custody. Other Novan representatives scrambled to distance themselves from the conspiracy, offering to cooperate with investigators. The chamber buzzed with conversation as representatives discussed the implications of what they had just learned. Sophie appeared at Daniel's side as the crowd began to disperse. She handed him a cup of water, which he drank gratefully. "You did it," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you could pull it off, but you actually did it." "We did it," Daniel corrected. "I could never have found all that evidence alone." High Counselor Kerrigan approached them, her expression a mix of relief and pride. "You took an enormous risk, Daniel, but you were right to take it. Earth is going to be very proud when they hear about this." Daniel nodded, but he was too tired to feel triumphant. He had been running on adrenaline for 24 hours. Now that the crisis was over, exhaustion was catching up to him, but there was still work to do. Stopping the war was just the first step. Now came the harder task of making sure nothing like this could happen again. Ambassador Vare and Commander Zarek stood together near the chamber's main viewport, looking out at the stars. They were talking quietly, perhaps for the first time truly listening to each other without anger clouding their judgment. Daniel watched them and felt hope. If these two could move past 3 years of manufactured hatred, then maybe there was hope for the whole galaxy. The galaxy had teetered on the brink of war. The weeks following Daniel's revelation were chaotic in ways he had not anticipated. The Coalition launched immediate investigations into every Novan Syndicate operation, across dozens of star systems. Security teams raided offices, froze financial accounts, and arrested individuals suspected of involvement in the conspiracy. The scope of the manipulation turned out to be even larger than Daniel had initially discovered. Daniel found himself at the center of a storm. His quiet life as a junior diplomatic officer had ended the moment he stood up in that council chamber. Now Coalition leaders sought his advice on everything from analyzing intelligence reports to restructuring security protocols. Military commanders wanted him to review their data for signs of other conspiracies. Even species that had barely acknowledged humanity before now treated Daniel with respect. The attention was overwhelming. Daniel had not slept properly in weeks. His small quarters had been upgraded to larger accommodations, but he barely spent time there. He worked 18-hour days, helping coordinate investigations, answering questions, and trying to piece together the full extent of what the Novans had done. Sophie Hayes remained his constant companion through all of it. She had been assigned as his security officer and assistant, a role that involved everything from managing his schedule to making sure he actually ate meals. Without her, Daniel knew he would have collapsed from exhaustion days ago. "You need to rest," Sophie told him one evening, finding him hunched over yet another stack of reports in his office. "You're going to burn out." "I will," Daniel promised, not looking up from the documents. "After I finish reviewing these financial transfers. There's a pattern here I can't quite see yet." Sophie reached over and closed the folder in front of him. "Now you need to rest now. The galaxy survived billions of years without you. It can manage for 8 hours while you sleep." Daniel wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. His eyes were burning. His thoughts were getting fuzzy. He nodded and let her guide him toward his quarters. Meanwhile, Ambassador Vare and Commander Zarek were dealing with their own challenges. 3 years of manufactured conflict had left deep wounds. Valorian warriors had prepared themselves mentally for war with the Kresh. Kresh soldiers had been ready to die defending their colonies. Those feelings did not disappear just because the truth had been revealed. Daniel had suggested a series of reconciliation meetings. He based the idea on Earth's experience with truth and reconciliation processes after major conflicts. The concept was new to most coalition species, but Vare and Zarek agreed to try it. The first meeting was painful. Valorian families whose loved ones had disappeared confronted Kresh representatives. Kresh survivors of the breeding ground attack demanded answers that no one could fully provide. Both sides had to acknowledge that they had been manipulated, that their anger had been manufactured, and that they had almost destroyed each other over lies. Daniel attended these meetings, offering guidance when asked but mostly staying quiet. This was not his moment. This was about the Valorians and Kresh finding their own path to healing. He was proud of how seriously both species took the process, how willing they were to be vulnerable and honest. One unexpected ally emerged during this time. A young Valorian diplomat named Sira Thane approached Daniel after one of the reconciliation sessions. Her crystalline body showed a gentle blue color, indicating calm thoughtfulness. She had been studying human conflict resolution techniques and wanted to learn more. "Your species has much wisdom about healing after war," Sira said. "This surprises many in the coalition. Humans are so new to galactic society, but you carry the weight of ancient experience." Daniel smiled sadly. "We've had a lot of practice making mistakes. Most of human history involves fighting each other. We've tried almost every wrong way to handle conflict, so now we know what does not work, and we're still learning what does." Sira became a regular presence in Daniel's work. So did a Kresh intelligence officer called Scout Captain Thrix. Thrix was older than most Kresh soldiers, scarred from decades of service and possessed a sharp analytical mind. He had been one of the first to recognize the value of Daniel's investigative methods. Together, the small team dug deeper into the Novan conspiracy. What they found was disturbing. The plan to start a war between the Valorians and Kresh had been only one of several operations. The Novans had been working for decades to destabilize the coalition, always from the shadows, always profiting from chaos. They found evidence of other conflicts being artificially inflamed, territorial disputes that were being pushed toward violence, trade disagreements that were being escalated beyond reason. In each case, Novan commercial interests stood to benefit from the resulting instability. "They were reshaping the entire galaxy," Thrix observed one day, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Not through military conquest, but through economic manipulation. Clever. Cowardly, but clever." Daniel understood the psychology behind it. The Novans came from a species that had evolved as traders and negotiators. They did not have the physical strength of the Kresh or the warrior tradition of the Valorians, but they were masters at understanding systems, finding weaknesses and exploiting them for profit. In a different context, those skills would have been admirable. Applied to destabilizing galactic peace, they were terrifying. The investigation also revealed backup plans the Novans had prepared. They had known their conspiracy might be discovered eventually, so they had planted false evidence, recruited sleeper agents, and prepared contingencies. Rooting out all these elements took weeks of careful work. Daniel received a message from Earth during this time. High Counselor Kerrigan brought it to him personally. His parents had sent a video, their faces beaming with pride. Friends from the Diplomatic Academy congratulated him. There was even a note from the Earth government, expressing gratitude and offering him any assignment he wanted when he returned home. But the message from Kerrigan herself was more complicated. "You've done something remarkable, Daniel. You've changed how the galaxy sees humanity, but with that comes responsibility. Every action you take now will be watched. People will use your behavior to judge all humans. It's not fair, but it's reality." Daniel understood. He was no longer just himself. He had become a symbol, a representative of human capabilities. The pressure of that realization was almost as heavy as the work itself. 2 months after his presentation in the council chamber, the coalition held a formal ceremony. Daniel was awarded the Star of Unity, one of the highest honors the coalition could bestow. Ambassador Vare and Commander Zarek both spoke on his behalf, praising his wisdom and courage. Daniel stood on the stage, accepting the medal, feeling both proud and uncomfortable with the attention. The real heroes, he thought, were Sophie and Sierra and Thrix and all the others who had helped. He had just been the one who asked the right questions at the right time. As the ceremony concluded, an aide hurried onto the stage and whispered urgently to the head mediator. The mediator's expression changed from celebratory to concerned. She stepped to the podium and called for attention. "I apologize for the interruption, but we have just received urgent information. The Novan Syndicate has launched a new operation. They are spreading false evidence across the Coalition communications network. Evidence that claims humanity was behind the original conspiracy. Evidence that suggests Daniel Grant's entire investigation was a deception to hide Earth's involvement." The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He looked at Sophie, who was already working her data tablet, trying to access the false information. Sierra's crystalline body had shifted to alarmed purple. Thrix's mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of agitation. This was the Novan contingency plan. Unable to hide their conspiracy any longer, they had decided to destroy humanity's reputation instead. If they could make the galaxy believe that Earth was the real villain, they would divert attention from their own crimes. They would turn Daniel from hero to suspect. And it was already working. Daniel could see doubt creeping into some faces in the audience. The false evidence was apparently very sophisticated. Within hours, the question would not be whether the Novans were guilty. It would be whether humans could be trusted at all. Ambassador Vare stepped forward, his color shifting to protective gold. "This is clearly a desperate lie. We will not allow it to stand." But Commander Zarek looked troubled. "The evidence will need to be examined. We must be certain one way or another." Daniel understood Zarek's position. The Kresh had been fooled once. They would be careful about being fooled again. Even his support for Daniel was tempered by the need for verification. High Counselor Kerrigan appeared at Daniel's side. Her face was pale. "The Earth delegation is being placed under protective custody. For our own safety, they say, but it means we're essentially under arrest until this is sorted out." Daniel looked at Sophie, at Sierra, at Thrix. His team, his friends, they looked back at him with determination. They did not believe the lies, but they would need to prove the truth all over again. And this time the accusations were personal. This time the fight was not just about stopping a war. It was about saving humanity's place in the galaxy. The false evidence spread through coalition communication networks like wildfire. Within hours, every major news service was discussing the accusations against humanity. The fabricated data was sophisticated and convincing. Forged financial records showed Earth transferring funds to mercenary groups. Manipulated video showed human officials discussing the conspiracy. Fake communications appeared to prove that Daniel had known about the manipulation all along. Daniel sat in his quarters, now effectively a prison, watching his life's work crumble. Species that had praised him days ago now questioned his motives. Some called for Earth's immediate expulsion from the coalition. Others demanded his arrest and trial. The human delegation was confined to their section of the station, under guard for their own protection. High Counselor Kerrigan paced the room, her face drawn with worry. Earth is considering withdrawing from the coalition entirely. They think we might be safer on our own than trying to fight these accusations. No, Daniel said firmly. That's exactly what the Novans want. If we run, we look guilty. If we withdraw, they win. We have to fight this. Sophie was already at work on her data tablet analyzing the false evidence. The fabrications are good, but they're not perfect. Nothing created artificially ever is. We just need to find the flaws. Sira Thane and Scout Captain Thrix arrived together, having convinced the guards to let them through. Both looked determined. Sira's crystalline body showed the deep blue of fierce loyalty. Thrix's mandibles were set in a pattern Daniel had learned meant stubborn resolve. We do not believe these lies, Sira said simply. We have worked with you. We know your character. We will help prove your innocence. The Kresh do not abandon allies, Thrix added. You stood for truth when it was difficult. We will do the same. Daniel felt emotion tighten his throat. After everything that had happened, after all the stress and doubt, these two beings from alien species were standing by him. Not because they had to, because they chose to. Thank you, he managed to say. Both of you. Now let's get to work. They gathered around Sophie's workstation. The team was small but determined. They began systematically examining every piece of false evidence, looking for the tiny mistakes that would prove fabrication. It was tedious work, requiring patience and attention to detail. Exactly the kind of work humans excelled at. Sophie found the first breakthrough. The forged financial records included metadata, the hidden information about when and how files were created. The timestamps did not match. Files supposedly created months ago showed creation dates from the past week. The Novans had been sloppy in covering their tracks. Thrix discovered problems with the video evidence. The deepfake technology used to create the fake footage of human officials was extremely advanced. Too advanced. Earth did not possess that level of video manipulation capability, but the Novan Syndicate had purchased similar technology from a known black market dealer 2 years ago. Daniel traced the origin points of where the false evidence had first appeared online. The communications had been routed through multiple relays to hide their source, but each relay left a tiny digital footprint. Following those footprints backward led to servers owned by Novan commercial interests. Sira contributed her knowledge of Valorian information systems. She helped them access diplomatic channels that showed the real communications between Earth and coalition authorities. The genuine records proved that the forged versions were fake, that conversations had been taken out of context or entirely fabricated. As they worked, word began to spread through the station. Other species, inspired by the example of Sira and Thrix, started speaking out in support of humanity. Ambassador Vare used his authority to demand a proper investigation rather than a rush to judgment. Smaller coalition members who had positive experiences with human diplomats added their voices. The tide was beginning to turn, but slowly. Daniel knew they needed something definitive, something that would prove beyond any doubt that humanity was innocent and the Novans were guilty. Sophie provided that proof. Using old Earth hacking techniques, methods that seemed primitive but worked precisely because they were unexpected, she penetrated a secured Novan data archive. Inside, she found the planning documents for the smear campaign against humanity. The files detailed exactly how the Novans intended to frame Earth, including drafts of the false evidence and strategies for spreading it. But there was more. The archive also contained evidence of other Novan conspiracies spanning decades, plans to manipulate governments, destabilize economies, and profit from chaos across the entire galaxy. The Syndicate had been working systematically to reshape the coalition according to their commercial interests. Always from the shadows, always deniable. This is it, Daniel said, reading through the documents with growing excitement. This proves everything, not just our innocence, but the entire scope of their operations. The Coalition Council convened an emergency session. This time, both sides would present their cases. The Novans sent a new representative, a smooth-talking advocate who argued that the evidence against humanity was overwhelming. He suggested that Earth was trying to deflect blame by making wild accusations. Then it was Daniel's turn. He walked to the center of the chamber, flanked by Sophie, Sira, and Thrix, his team, his friends. Together, they presented their findings. They showed the metadata errors, the impossible technology, the traced communications. They demonstrated how every piece of evidence against humanity was fabricated. Finally, Sophie revealed the Novan planning documents. The chamber fell absolutely silent as the files appeared on displays throughout the room. The plans were laid out in meticulous detail. The Novans had documented their own conspiracy, confident that their archives were secure. The Novan representative tried to object, to claim the documents were themselves fake. But the evidence was irrefutable. Other coalition security services verified the authenticity. The files came from secured Novan servers. They were written in internal syndicate codes. They referenced operations that only Novan leadership would know about. Ambassador Vare stood, his crystalline form blazing with righteous anger. The Novans have manipulated us for the last time. They have attacked the honor of their fellow coalition members. They have profited from our conflicts. I call for their immediate expulsion from coalition space. Commander Zarek rose as well. The Kresh Collective agrees. Furthermore, we propose that all Novan assets be seized and used to compensate the species who have suffered from their schemes. The vote was unanimous. The Novan Syndicate was expelled from the coalition. Their leadership would face justice. Their commercial operations would be dismantled. The conspiracy that had threatened galactic peace for decades was finally, truly broken. As the council session ended, Daniel felt exhaustion and relief in equal measure. He had cleared humanity's name. He had proven that seeking truth and justice was not naive but necessary. He had shown that sometimes the greatest strength is simply refusing to give up when things seem impossible. Ambassador Vare approached him as the chamber emptied. You have taught the coalition a valuable lesson, young Daniel. We have learned to question, to verify, to not rush to judgment. This wisdom will serve us well in the years to come. 6 months later, Daniel stood in his new office as Director of Coalition Intelligence Analysis. He was the youngest being to ever hold such a position, and definitely the only human. His methods had been adopted throughout coalition security services. Training programs now taught the investigative techniques that had exposed the Novan conspiracy. More humans had joined the coalition diplomatic and security services. They brought with them Earth's painful lessons about conflict, manipulation, and the importance of verification. A new academy had been established to share these skills with all coalition species. The Valorians and Kresh had completed their reconciliation process. The disputed territories had been turned into a joint development zone, a symbol of cooperation where war had nearly erupted. Ambassador Vare and Commander Zarek traveled together throughout the coalition, speaking about the dangers of manufactured conflict and the importance of seeking truth. Daniel stood at an observation window in his office, watching ships from 100 different species pass by the station. Sophie entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, a ritual that had continued from those desperate early days. She handed him a cup and stood beside him. Did you ever imagine things would turn out this way? She asked. Daniel smiled. I just wanted to stop a war. Everything else has been a surprise. A good surprise, but still a surprise. Sierra and Thrix joined them at the window. The 4 of them watched the peaceful traffic together. Ships from species that had been enemies were now trading partners. Beings who had nearly destroyed each other were working side by side. The galaxy had changed, not through military conquest or technological superiority, but through the simple determination of one human who refused to accept that war was inevitable. Daniel Grant had asked the right questions at the right time. He had followed the evidence wherever it led. He had trusted in truth when others chose fear. The galaxy had teetered on the brink of war. One human had stopped it all. And in doing so, he had shown every species in the coalition that humanity's greatest strength was not physical power or advanced technology,